So Biden is still fighting for the soul of America. What about his arch-rival Putin? The Russian president believes the soul of his country was destroyed long ago, in 1991 to be precise. That's when the Soviet Union was disbanded. For many nationalists, it was a disaster. Overnight, Russia went from superpower to fringe player. Putin was especially hurt. Years later, this is how he described the Soviet collapse, and I'm quoting, "It is worth acknowledging that the demise of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century. As for the Russian people, it became a genuine tragedy." So you get the sentiment. Putin was not some Lenin fanboy or some hardcore communist. What hurt him was the loss of power. Russia was no longer able to challenge the United States, and that's what hurt Vladimir Putin the most. Now, why am I giving you this history lesson? Because the past helps explain what Putin is doing now. He has denied a state funeral to Mikhail Gorbachev. Gorbachev was the last leader of the Soviet Union. He presided over its dissolution. If you ask people in the West, he was a great leader, the man who ended the Cold War. But in Russia, his legacy is complicated. Putin's generation blames him for weakening Russia. So no state funeral for him. On Saturday, Gorbachev's body will be placed in the Moscow Hall of Columns. Later that day, he will be buried next to his wife, who died in 1999. It won't be a state funeral, just a normal ceremony. And that's snub number one. Snub number two is this: Vladimir Putin himself will not attend it. He paid his respects at the hospital, but apparently his schedule won't let him attend the funeral. Now, we get that Putin is a busy man. He's leading a war in Ukraine, but surely he can spare a few minutes for this funeral. After all, Gorbachev was one of the most influential figures of the 20th century. You may or may not like him, but the fact is he changed the course of history. Which brings us to the larger debate around his legacy. Should we celebrate Gorbachev or not? Communists around the world are divided, including some here in India. They blame Gorbachev for ending the great Soviet experiment. But how great was it? The Russian Revolution in 1917 promised a lot: equality for all, food for all, work for all, but none of those promises were ever met. The Soviet Union stumbled through mass executions, gulags, war and hunger deaths. It failed to close the gap with the West. So in 1985, they made one last attempt. They appointed a young leader to revive the floundering Union, and that young leader was Mikhail Gorbachev. His mandate was quite clear: reform the Soviet economy, catch up with the West, and bridge the divide between old and young leaders. He couldn't do it. He failed to deliver socialist utopia, but in the process, he did something much bigger. He gave freedom to millions of Soviet citizens. He gave them rights and dignity. So you cannot separate Gorbachev from the Soviet Union. Neither can you forget its violent history. The countries. Reports say 20 million people died under Stalin's rule. Does that sound like communist perfection to you? And don't forget the imperialist campaigns. Communist states are supposed to condemn imperialism, but the Soviet Union practiced it. They invaded Hungary in 1956, they invaded Poland in 1939, and Afghanistan in 1979. Again, doesn't sound like communist utopia. My point is, Gorbachev's legacy can always be debated, but the Soviet Union's cannot. It was a tyrannical regime that made a joke of communism. Well, I could say the same about most superpowers. Imperial Britain, the United States, today's China, all of them commit excesses abroad. So Vladimir Putin's snub is not ideological. It is not regret over the fall of communism. It is regret over the fall of Russian supremacy. In fact, he feels the same about Imperial Russia. Putin is a huge fan of Peter the Great. So in conclusion, let me say this: Mikhail Gorbachev's death has brought back a lot of memories, and that too at a difficult time for Russia. A supposed easy war in Ukraine has dragged on for more than 6 months. It's a reminder of how deep Russia has fallen. From invincible superpower to a struggling regional bully, Gorbachev was just an easy target, we say. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.